For centuries, the stories you've read, the prayers you've whispered, the beliefs you've clung to, they've all been part of a carefully crafted narrative. But God of the Bible might not be who you think He is. What if those ancient texts weren't just tales of divine intervention, but accounts of extraterrestrial encounters? Yes, I'm talking about the Anunnaki, ancient beings whose fingerprints might still be all over the Bible. First, let's get one thing straight: the Bible wasn't written in English. The original Hebrew texts use the term Elohim when referring to God. And here's the kicker: Elohim isn't singular. It's plural. We're not talking about one God, but potentially a group of beings. In Genesis, where it says, "Let us make man in our image," who's cuss? Who's lower? For years, theologians have danced around this question, claiming it's the royal we or angels, but what if the answer is simpler and far more provocative? The Anunnaki, according to ancient Sumerian records, were advanced beings who came to Earth thousands of years ago. They're often depicted as creators, genetic engineers who played a pivotal role in shaping humanity. Let's talk about Sumeria, the cradle of civilization. The Sumerians gave us writing, law codes, and stunningly advanced astronomical knowledge. Where did it all come from? They claimed they were taught these things by gods, the Anunnaki. Their records, meticulously carved into stone tablets, describe these beings descending from the sky in flying vessels and interacting with humans. They weren't just worshipped, they were feared, revered, and documented. When you compare the stories from the Bible with Sumerian texts like the Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are striking parallels. The flood story? That's in both texts. The idea of humans being created from clay. Sumerian said the Anunnaki mixed clay with their own genetic material. Sound familiar? Genesis echoes this idea with Adam being formed from dust. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's something more. Think about Yahweh in the Old Testament, the fire, the smoke, the booming voice from the heavens. Primitive humans described advanced technology in the only terms they understood. But pillar of fire by night that led the Israelites through the desert? Could that have been a spacecraft? Ezekiel's vision of a wheel within a wheel? Sounds a lot like machinery, doesn't it? And don't even get me started on the Ark of the Covenant. It's described as radiating such power that anyone who touched it would die instantly. That doesn't sound like divine magic, that sounds like technology, advanced, dangerous technology that our ancestors couldn't comprehend. If the Bible is, in part, a record of ancient encounters with extraterrestrials, what does that mean for everything we think we know? Don't just take my word for it. Look into this yourself. The evidence is there, buried in ancient texts, hidden in plain sight. They're not just stories, they're accounts, clues, breadcrumbs leading us to a truth that's far more extraordinary than anything we've been taught. Let's talk about one of the most controversial ideas in the Bible, the relationship, or lack thereof, between Jesus and Yahweh. You've probably been told they're one and the same, two aspects of a singular divine entity. But what if that's not true? What if Jesus and Yahweh represent two entirely different ideologies, two opposing forces, one of love and compassion, the other of control and power? Look at the Old Testament. Yahweh is portrayed as a jealous, vengeful, and often wrathful deity. He orders genocides, punishes disobedience with plagues, and demands absolute obedience. His presence is described as terrifying: fire, smoke, thunder. Now contrast that with Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus preaches forgiveness, humility, and unconditional love. He spends his time healing the sick, uplifting the marginalized, and even forgiving his executioners. Let's go deeper into the texts. When Jesus speaks of the Father, he never explicitly refers to him as Yahweh. In fact, when challenged by the religious elite of his time, the Pharisees and Sadducees, Jesus criticizes their strict adherence to the laws and rituals handed down by Yahweh. He accuses them of being hypocrites, more concerned with rules than with the spirit of love and mercy. Was Jesus subtly rejecting the Old Testament image of God? Was he introducing humanity to an entirely different understanding of divinity? In John 8 verse 44, Jesus says something shocking to the Pharisees. He tells them, "You belong to your father, the devil." Wait a minute, what? These were the keepers of Yahweh's law, the very representatives of the Old Testament God. Why would Jesus say such a thing unless he saw a fundamental disconnect between their God and the divine truth he came to reveal? And then there's the matter of the Gospel of Thomas, a text excluded from the official canon but widely studied for its unique perspective on Jesus' teachings. In it, Jesus doesn't speak of a wrathful, controlling God. Instead, he emphasizes personal enlightenment, self-discovery, and the divine spark within every individual. No sacrifices, no wrath, no fear. This is a Jesus who is profoundly different from the God of the Old Testament. Now let's talk about the crucifixion. At the moment of his greatest suffering, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That line is often brushed off as Jesus quoting Psalm 22, but what if it's something more? What if, in that moment, Jesus was expressing a profound separation, not just from Yahweh, but from the entire paradigm of fear-based obedience that Yahweh represented? What if Jesus' mission was to liberate humanity from the chains of that old system and introduce us to a higher, more compassionate understanding of divinity? If Yahweh wasn't the Father that Jesus spoke of, then who or what was? Could it have been another being entirely? A being who opposed Yahweh's methods and sought to guide humanity in a different direction? Ancient texts outside the Bible, like the Gnostic writings, suggest that Yahweh could have been one of many lesser deities, powerful, yes, but not supreme. In this view, Jesus came to reveal the truth about a higher divine source, a source of pure love and unity, far beyond the tribalistic and vengeful Yahweh of the Old Testament. Don't just take my word for it. Dive into the texts yourself. Read the Bible with fresh eyes. Look for the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the moments where Jesus seems to diverge from Yahweh's narrative. The answers are there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those bold enough to seek them. The Book of Enoch. This is one of the most controversial ancient texts, and for good reason. It wasn't included in the Bible as we know it today, but that doesn't mean it wasn't revered by early believers. In fact, the Book of Enoch was widely read and accepted in the early centuries of Judaism and Christianity, and it tells a story that completely flips our understanding of human history. The Book of Enoch describes a group of beings called the Watchers. These were supposed to be angels, divine beings tasked with observing humanity. But instead of just watching, some of them decided to interfere. They came down to earth, took human wives, and fathered a race of giants called the Nephilim. This wasn't some casual fling. It was described as a rebellion, a cosmic betrayal. Now, stop right there. Does this sound like the kind of angelic, pure beings you'd expect in a traditional religious narrative? These Watchers taught humans forbidden knowledge, weapon-making, cosmetics, astrology, sorcery. Think about what that implies. If humanity's early leaps in technology and culture were guided by these beings, then our progress wasn't purely organic, it was orchestrated. According to the Book of Enoch, the actions of the Watchers threw the world into chaos. The Nephilim, their hybrid offspring, were described as violent and destructive, wreaking havoc on the earth. The corruption became so severe that it supposedly led to the Great Flood, a divine reset button meant to wipe out the Nephilim and cleanse the earth of the Watchers' influence. This isn't just a fringe story relegated to a forgotten text. The influence of the Book of Enoch is all over the Bible. In Genesis 6 verse 4, it briefly mentions the Nephilim, calling them the heroes of old and men of renown. That's a sanitized version, but it's there. Jude and 2 Peter in the New Testament also reference the Watchers being punished and chained in darkness until the day of judgment. So why isn't this story front and center in mainstream religious teachings? Why was it stripped from the canon? If these Watchers were responsible for imparting knowledge and advancing human civilization, doesn't that make them look more like benefactors than villains? And if they were punished so severely for it, what does that say about the forces in control, the ones who wanted humanity kept in the dark? It makes you wonder who the real heroes and villains are in this story. Now let's talk about the war. The Book of Enoch describes a full-scale heavenly conflict. The Archangel Michael and other loyal angels wage war against the Watchers. This isn't the soft, sanitized angel imagery you see on Christmas cards. This was a battle, an actual war, with consequences that shaped the world. And here's where things get wild. Some scholars and researchers suggest that these conflicts might have been far more literal than we've been led to believe. Imagine advanced beings, yes, extraterrestrials, fighting for control over Earth and its inhabitants. The descriptions in ancient texts suddenly take on a whole new meaning. Flaming chariots, thunderous voices from the sky, pillars of fire, could these be descriptions of advanced technology? Weapons of unimaginable power? And it doesn't stop there. Some accounts suggest that not all the Watchers were destroyed or imprisoned. What if some remained, operating in the shadows, continuing to influence humanity? It raises the possibility that the so-called gods of mythologies around the world, Greek, Norse, Hindu, might all trace their origins back to these same beings. And let's not ignore the implications of the flood itself. The Bible and the Book of Enoch describe it as an act of divine justice, but look at it through another lens. Could it have been a deliberate attempt to erase the evidence of these hybrid beings and their influence on humanity? A reset, yes, but for whose benefit? Let's talk about something that completely blows the lid off the idea that ancient civilizations were primitive, advanced technology hidden in plain sight within ancient texts. Think about this. How does a society thousands of years ago describe technology that's far beyond their understanding? They use the only language they have. And when you go back and reread the Bible, it's packed with descriptions that sound eerily like machinery and technology, not miracles. Take Ezekiel's vision, for example. You've probably heard of it, the famous wheel within a wheel described in the book of Ezekiel. Now, theologians have interpreted this as some kind of symbolic vision, but let's break it down. Ezekiel describes a flying object, shimmering like glowing metal, with wheels intersecting each other and capable of moving in any direction without turning. Does that sound like a divine chariot, or does it sound like a highly advanced vehicle, something mechanical, designed for flight? Ezekiel even mentions something that could be interpreted as landing gear. He describes something like a throne on top of the craft, with a figure that seemed human in form seated on it. Ancient astronaut theorists argue that this isn't a vision of God. This is Ezekiel witnessing a spacecraft, something so advanced he could only explain it using the imagery of his time. But it doesn't stop with Ezekiel. Let's talk about the Ark of the Covenant. It's one of the most mysterious objects described in the Bible, a chest that radiates incredible power. According to the book of Exodus, the Ark could strike people dead, produce fire, and even destroy armies. Priests who carried it had to wear special garments to protect themselves. Doesn't that sound more like a dangerous piece of high-voltage technology than a religious artifact? Could the Ark have been some kind of advanced energy device, something left behind by beings far more technologically advanced than humans? Now, consider the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud that guided the Israelites during the Exodus. Traditional interpretations describe these as manifestations of God's presence. But think about it, could this have been a flying object? A craft emitting light and smoke as it moved through the desert? In modern terms, we'd call that an aircraft or a drone. The descriptions match what you'd expect from a vehicle using propulsion systems to hover and navigate. Let's take a moment to look at the Tower of Babel. The Bible says humanity came together to build a tower to reach the heavens, but God stopped them by confusing their language and scattering them across the earth. What if the tower wasn't just a metaphor? What if it was a literal attempt at advanced technology, maybe even a launchpad or some kind of gateway, stopped by more advanced beings who didn't want humans accessing their level of technology? And it's not just the Bible. These stories are everywhere in ancient cultures. The Vedic texts of India describe flying machines called Vimanas that could soar through the skies and engage in aerial battles. In ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs have been found that appear to depict modern aircraft, helicopters, submarines, and even spaceships. Coincidences? Or are these cultures describing the same technology, witnessed in different places and times? Here's where it gets really interesting. If these advanced technologies were real, who brought them here? The logical answer is that they weren't of human origin. the Watchers, the Anunnaki, or other beings described in ancient texts, whatever name you give them, may have introduced these technologies. And the reason they appear as miracles in the Bible and other records is because the people witnessing them had no context to understand what they were seeing. Think about how we'd describe a smartphone to someone from the 12th century. It would seem like magic, an object that lights up, lets you see people from far away, plays music. That's exactly what ancient people were doing when they described what they saw. But instead of calling it technology, they called it divine. The Sumerians, the world's first known civilization, believed their gods, the Anunnaki, came from the stars. The word Anunnaki roughly translates to those who came from the heavens to earth. According to their records, the Anunnaki were powerful beings who arrived on Earth seeking resources, specifically gold. Why gold? Not for jewelry or wealth, but for its technological and possibly atmospheric properties. Some researchers suggest they needed it to repair their planet's atmosphere, using advanced technologies that are beyond human comprehension even today. The ancient texts, particularly the Enuma Elish and other Sumerian tablets, describe the Anunnaki's efforts to mine Earth's resources. But here's where it gets fascinating. Mining was hard, labor-intensive work. The Anunnaki workers, often referred to as the Hijiji, eventually rebelled, refusing to continue the back-breaking labor. Facing this crisis, the Anunnaki leaders, Enki and Enlil, proposed a radical solution: create a new species to serve as workers. The Sumerian records explicitly describe the process of creating humans as a deliberate act of genetic engineering. Enki, known as the god of wisdom and creation, allegedly took the genetic material from a primitive hominid species already present on Earth and combined it with the essence of the Anunnaki. The result? Homo sapiens, a hybrid species capable of intelligence, communication, and labor. This wasn't just an experiment. The texts detail specific steps, referring to tools and methods that sound strikingly similar to modern genetic manipulation. For example, they describe the use of a womb to incubate the first humans, possibly an early reference to artificial gestation or genetic splicing. Even the Bible echoes this process in a veiled way, with the creation of Adam from dust and the breath of life being given to him. And the control didn't stop at creation. The Anunnaki didn't just make humans and leave them alone. They ruled over them, established civilizations, and even dictated laws and societal structures. The Sumerian king lists, ancient texts that record the reigns of early rulers, speak of kingship descending from heaven, implying that human governance was initially orchestrated by these extraterrestrial beings. But this wasn't a harmonious relationship. Over time, the Anunnaki's dominance over humanity became more complex and, in many cases, oppressive. The Atrahasis epic, another key Sumerian text, describes humanity becoming so numerous and noisy that the gods grew irritated. This eventually led to the decision to send a great flood to wipe out their creation, a story that parallels the biblical account of Noah. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. These stories of divine creation, intervention, and destruction aren't unique to Sumeria or the Bible. Similar myths appear across cultures worldwide, from the Mesoamerican tales of Quetzalcoatl creating humans from maize to the Chinese legend of Nua molding humans from clay. The patterns are consistent, as though all these stories are retelling the same events from different perspectives. The question isn't whether these events happened, it's why these cultures, separated by thousands of miles and with no known contact, have such similar narratives. The simplest explanation is often the most shocking: they were all documenting real events. The Anunnaki's influence wasn't confined to Mesopotamia, it may have been global. Let's get into the uncomfortable reality of how much of our history has been erased, distorted, or outright hidden. Start with ancient texts. The Sumerian cuneiform tablets are some of the oldest written records in existence. They describe the Anunnaki in extraordinary detail: who they were, what they did, and how they interacted with humanity. But ask yourself this: how often do you hear about the Sumerians in mainstream education? Instead, their stories are dismissed as mythology, while far younger texts, like the Bible, are given more weight in shaping human history. Even within the Bible, traces of the Anunnaki remain. Terms like Elohim and Nephilim are relics of a deeper narrative. And yet, centuries of religious councils, from the Council of Nisha to countless scriptural revisions, have chipped away at anything that might contradict the sanitized version of events. The Book of Enoch, which explicitly details the Watchers and their hybrid offspring, was excluded from the Bible. Why? Because it raises questions about humanity's origins that traditional doctrines aren't equipped to answer. It doesn't stop at religion. Historical artifacts that don't fit the accepted timeline are routinely ignored or dismissed as anomalies. Take the Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old artifact that appears to function as an electrical device. Or the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek artifact resembling a complex computer. These objects challenge the narrative that ancient humans were technologically primitive. And yet, they're relegated to obscure museum corners, rarely discussed in mainstream archaeology. Consider the megalithic structures scattered across the globe, sites like Baalbek in Lebanon, the Great Pyramid of Giza, and Tiwanaku in Bolivia. These sites defy conventional explanations. The precision engineering, the sheer size of the stones, and the alignment with celestial events suggest knowledge and capabilities far beyond what ancient civilizations should have had. Yet mainstream academia insists these structures were built with rudimentary tools and sheer manpower, ignoring the possibility that external influences, like the Anunnaki, might have been involved. And then there's the role of colonialism in erasing history. When empires expanded, they destroyed or suppressed indigenous knowledge systems that preserved ancient truths. From the burning of the Library of Alexandria to the systematic dismantling of Mayan, Aztec, and Inca cultures, countless records of humanity's past were obliterated. The question isn't just what was lost, but why? What were they trying to hide? Modern institutions haven't been much better. When researchers in the 19th and 20th centuries unearthed Sumerian tablets and other artifacts, much of the material ended up in private collections or locked away in university archives. Even today, many artifacts remain untranslated or unpublished, leaving the public in the dark about what they might reveal. Why would institutions dedicated to knowledge keep these discoveries hidden? The answer lies in control. Knowledge is power, and the ability to shape the narrative of human history is the ultimate power. If the truth about the Anunnaki and their role in our origins were widely accepted, it would upend everything, our understanding of religion, science, and humanity's place in the universe. Those in power, whether political, religious, or academic, have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And let's not forget the influence of modern media. Popular culture often trivializes the idea of ancient astronauts, relegating it to the realm of science fiction and conspiracy theories. Shows like Ancient Aliens are entertaining, sure, but they dilute the seriousness of the evidence. It's an effective way to discredit the topic without addressing the actual data. Let's wrap this up by addressing what all of this means when we look at the bigger picture. For centuries, we've been told a version of history that keeps humanity small, disconnected from its true origins, and locked into systems of control. But when you start to connect the dots, from the Anunnaki's genetic experiments to the advanced technology buried in ancient texts and the deliberate suppression of critical knowledge, it becomes clear our history is far more extraordinary than we've been led to believe. The Anunnaki, as recorded by the Sumerians, were not just distant deities or mythological figures. They were physical beings who walked among humans, shaping civilizations, laws, and even our very biology. Their influence wasn't limited to Mesopotamia, it stretched across the globe. You see traces of their presence in the pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of South America, and even in the astronomical alignments of ancient sites. These weren't coincidences. They were deliberate, precise, and incredibly advanced actions by beings who operated on a level far beyond our current understanding. Now, let's get into the idea of why this narrative has been so fiercely controlled. Knowledge of the Anunnaki and their role in humanity's origins challenges the foundations of religion, science, and government. It shifts the focus from a purely divine creation story to one that incorporates elements of genetic engineering, extraterrestrial influence, and global collaboration between ancient civilizations. That's not just a rewrite of history, it's a complete upheaval of how humanity views itself. Even our most sacred institutions seem to have traces of this deeper truth. Consider the rituals, symbols, and texts that have survived thousands of years. Many of them can be traced back to ancient Sumerian practices and Anunnaki narratives, yet they've been repackaged into forms that serve the interests of centralized power structures. These distortions aren't accidents, they're tools of control. The less we know about our true past, the easier it is to manipulate us in the present. And this isn't just about the past. The evidence suggests that the Anunnaki didn't simply vanish after shaping human civilization. Many believe their influence persists in subtle ways, woven into our cultural myths, scientific pursuits, and even the hierarchies that govern modern society. From the obsession with gold in the global economy to the recurring themes of gods descending from the sky, the echoes of their presence are all around us. What makes this even more compelling is the idea that their return, or at least some form of renewed contact, could be imminent. Whether through advancements in space exploration, genetic research, or archaeological discoveries, humanity is on the brink of reconnecting with its origins. As we close this chapter, one thing is certain: the story of humanity is far bigger, deeper, and more complex than what you've been told. The Anunnaki aren't just relics of an ancient past. They're part of a narrative that spans galaxies, epochs, and dimensions. And we, as humans, are not just the result of their experiments. We are inheritors of a legacy that has the potential to unlock unimaginable power and understanding if we're willing to embrace it. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this video. I know this was a lot to take in, but these conversations are crucial. Together, we're piecing together the fragments of a story that's been buried for millennia. If you found this as fascinating as I did, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our existence. See you in the next video.